The Browns are 8-3, and the Titans are also 8-3. But when you hear about this game being talked about both locally and nationally, the Browns are the underdogs. Most people just don't expect the Browns to really show up in this game or put up a good game or even win the game. They think of this game as being a tough task. And to be fair, a lot of that is true. A lot of that has a ton of truth to it. Derrick Henry is in full beast mode. I think he almost had 200 yards last week. And this is a Browns defense that's still recovering from multiple injuries, a small outbreak, and no Denzel Ward, more than likely. So my question for this week is this mass dismissal of the Browns this week justified? Do the Browns have a chance to beat the Titans this week? Well, let's talk about it. Before I get into this video, I have to give a special shout out to the Dog Check tier Patreon members. And as always, that starts with my guy, Michael Matique, Greg Ealer, Seth Harrison, Corporal Nick Lopez, Nick Nasty, Mandela Moore, the only Browns fan in Wisconsin, Batman, Jake Phillips, Rush Shear, Barack Kumar, John Alver, Masayua, Buds Roland, Ethan Rindauer, James Nemo, Mac House, Reeve Hertz, Justin Cole, Philip Wilcoxon, Marie Vivert, Timothy McClure, Keith Anderson, Joshua Still, Sean Barron, Gagos Pisano, Dom Gazzulo, Ian Whitaker, Colin 216, Anthony Latham, Christian, Matt Bond, Dave Strong, Michael Stone, Soul Train, Charles Work, Dan in West Texas, Billy, Michael Holdenack, Jared Austin, Moose Gentry, Patrick F., Austin Z., Mark Burnett II, Andre Griffin, Otis Wolf, IT Rex, Austin Bolin, Jesus Serrano, Joshua Paulus, Chris Farms, Pick Down Browns Backers, Mark Kahn, Max Al Dojo, Beerman 069, SSJ Swift, Andrew Hirsch, Feeling Dangerous 113, Dave Mike May, John Cummings, Robert Germain, Cleveland BCI, Anthony O, Bobo Regretti, Seth Harrison, and CK. Again, guys, I want to thank you for that support. Now let's jump into this preview. And the first thing I have to say is that these two teams are very, very similar, almost identical in some respects. And I'm going to show you the similarities, especially on offense, just to illustrate this point, right? The Browns, when it comes to passing, they have the number 1 completed air yards in the NFL. The Titans, number 6 with 7. The Browns have the 31st least passing attempts in the NFL. The Titans are not that far ahead of them at 28. The Browns have the number 6 play action pass yards, while the Titans, they pass a little bit more off the play action at number 1 with 1,121. When you talk about how the teams run the ball, it's even more similar, right? Rushing attempts, the Browns are number 4, the Titans are number 1. When it comes to rushing yards, the Browns are number 1, the Titans are number 2. When it comes to first downs, the Browns are number 5, the Titans are number 4 with 1 first down separating them. When it comes to broken tackles, the Browns are number 3, the Titans are right there behind them at number 4. Yeah, when it comes to yards per game, the Browns are number 1 with 161.4, and the Titans are number 2 with 158.2. These two teams could not be more close, could not be more similar, could not be more identical, quite honestly. When you try to dissect it and figure out which team has the edge when these two teams are this close, you actually are surprised with what you find, because I think one of the edges that a lot of people, especially people who don't watch the Browns every week, would obviously give to Tennessee is at the quarterback position. I mean, Ryan Tannehill has a top 5 QBR. He's been one of the best 10 quarterbacks in football, while Baker Mayfield has had his moments, but also had moments where he hasn't looked great. So obviously, these two quarterbacks, Ryan Tannehill is the better one. And if you're talking about the entire body of work for the season, that's absolutely true. But if we're talking about recently who's playing better, well, that's a little bit more muddy, and surprisingly, that leans in the direction of Baker Mayfield. I'm going to put up here the stats, but if you look at what these two quarterbacks have done recently, right, the last 5 games, Baker Mayfield has a higher PFF grade. He has a better touchdown interception ratio. He has the same amount of yards, essentially. I think 5 yards separate him, with a better completion percentage by about 3 points, a higher quarterback passer rating, and then they have almost the same QBR. So even the Titans' edge in this case, which would be quarterback, because we're going to get to why the Browns have a better running game in a second, but even their edge at quarterback, when you dissect it and really look at it through a microscopic lens, doesn't seem to be there like people think it's there. And again, if you look at the cumulative stats throughout the entire year, yes, Ryan Tannehill has had a much better year than Baker Mayfield. But if you're just looking at what they have put on the field recently, and again, 5 games is not a nothing sample size, it looks like in some respects Baker Mayfield might be playing better than Ryan Tannehill, which might be a surprise to a lot of people given how Baker's been portrayed in the media, how he has played recently. So that's interesting. Then when you look at the running back situation, right, because that's the other one where there's going to be a slight edge. The Browns have the edge in that position because, yes, the Titans are a very good run blocking team. They are not as good as a run blocking team as the Cleveland Browns. They do not have the same strength at offensive line that the Cleveland Browns have. And also, they do have Derrick Henry. And Derrick Henry is probably at this point playing a little bit better than Nick Chubb, even though I would argue Nick Chubb's a little bit more versatile and can do more things than Derrick Henry can, but Derrick Henry has put the numbers up. So yes, Derrick Henry, slight edge over Nick Chubb, but Kareem Hunt is much better than the Titans' second running back at this point. So when you have a better run blocking unit, when you have a better run blocking offensive line, and you have better depth at the position, you have the edge at the running back position. So a lot of things that if you just look at it on first glance, if you just kind of glance over at this game and you don't really take a deep dive into it, would seem to heavily favor the Titans that don't actually heavily favor the Titans in the way a lot of people would assume. So to further illustrate that, I want to break this game down even further. So let's talk about the Browns' defensive matchup against this Titans offense. Now, the number one key to this game for the defense, for the offense, for any unit that takes a field, for any team in this game, is time of possession. That is the most important thing, right? The Browns need time of possession to win. The Titans need time of possession. This is going to be a battle over time of possession. And the Titans' 3 losses to Pittsburgh, Cincy, and the Colts, they lost the time of possession battle. And while I'm not trying to downplay the importance that Derrick Henry and A.J. Brown are going to have, I do want to say the truth of the matter is when you play the Titans, Derrick Henry can go off for 150 yards and 2 touchdowns. You can still beat the Titans. A.J. Brown can go off for 100 yards and a touchdown. You can still beat the Titans. All that can happen in the same game. You can still beat the Titans. Heck, you can even throw 3 interceptions against the Titans and still win as long as you win time of possession. And how do I know this? Well, it's what other teams have done to him. Pittsburgh threw 3 interceptions versus Tennessee, still won that game. Now, I know a lot of you are saying, well, Pittsburgh's undefeated. The Browns aren't Pittsburgh. Understandable. That's a fair point. What about Cincinnati, who allowed Derrick Henry to go off, who allowed A.J. Brown to go off, but they still won time of possession? They did not get pressured when they had the ball, so Joe Burrow was able to dot them around and kind of move the ball at his own pace, and they ended up winning that game by a pretty convincing margin. So these are all things that the Browns can do. These are all things that the Browns are capable of. The question is, will this be another Raiders situation where they lose the time of possession battle so handedly that they're never really in the game to begin with, or have no room for error when they are in the game? Or will this be, more or less like they have done all season, where the Browns can dominate that time of possession stat? It's going to be a battle, a tug of war over time of possession, because both teams need it to win. So that is going to be the most important thing in this game. So all that being said, how does this Browns team stack up? How does this defense stack up against what is a really good Titans offense? Well, much better than you might have assumed, especially against somebody like Derrick Henry. Now, allow me to explain why I feel that way. The Browns defense, I've said this for multiple weeks. I've said this all season. Their run defense has been inconsistent. Sometimes they are really good. Sometimes they're really bad. Against the Raiders, they were really bad. They lost time of possession. They got gashed all game, and it ended up costing them that game. But against a team like the Ravens, who at their full strength, when they had Mark Ingram, everybody, Lamar Jackson healthy at the beginning of the season, was the first game of the season, the Browns didn't do a lot of things in that game, but one thing they did do was stop the run. Now, how can a team stop the run against Baltimore at full strength and not stop the run against the Raiders? It's because the Browns are good at stopping specific kinds of runs and awful at stopping specific kinds of runs. It's a very hit or miss game with the Cleveland Browns defense. If teams that thrive running the ball in between their guards and center, those teams are going to run well against the Cleveland Browns. But the closer to the edge that run game goes, the more stretch plays, the more toss plays that are in a offensive run game plan, the better the Browns tend to be. Now, part of that is because they have decent run-stopping linebackers. No Sione Takitaki, no Denzel Ward. That might affect it. But a lot of that is Myles Garrett and Olivier Vernon on the edge. Those two are really athletic and actually really good. And to give Olivier Vernon credit, he's been good at that all season. And the problem for the Titans is, and I'm not saying Derrick Henry's not going to have 100 yards. I think he's probably going to have 100 yards. But the problem for the Titans is Derrick Henry does his most damage on the edges. If you watch any Derrick Henry highlight tape, if you ever watch Derrick Henry play for a full game, you know where he does his damage. It's on these toss and stretch plays to the right side of his offensive line, going downhill so he can get one-on-one matchups with corners and smaller linebackers so he can go one-on-one with them, stiff arm them, and take advantage of them. That's the game plan for Derrick Henry. You know, the ideal being there that Derrick Henry's a lot easier to tackle when he has guys his own size trying to tackle him. So you want to get him out in space because he's faster in a straight line than most people assume, and a little bit quicker than most people assume. So you want to get him out there in space and have DBs try to get him. And when you do that, great things happen. Now, it's a great game plan. The problem is the one thing that the Browns do well when it comes to their run defense is that specifically. So it's going to be interesting to see how that matches up. And to further illustrate this point, let me tell you about Derrick Henry's stats. Derrick Henry has 669 yards, 7 touchdowns when he's running outside the tackle box. So either going off tackle or just running off the inline tight end on both sides of the field. That's what he does. It's a 5.3 yard per carry average. When he does not, when he's running inside the tackle box, he has 586 yards, 4 touchdowns, 4.47 yards per carry. So almost a yard less, much less touchdowns. He's much less productive off of more carries. He gets more carries on the inside. He's just not as productive on the inside as he is on the outside. So if the Browns can do a good job at stopping the outside run, you have a decent job of stopping Derrick Henry and the Titans' ability to gash you. Sure, they're going to get maybe 1 or 2 chunk runs, but if you stop them from being able to consistently gash you, that's going to be significant. So for that reason, I don't think that's the matchup that should terrify the Browns. The matchup that should terrify the Browns is A.J. Brown on Terrence Mitchell and Corey Davis on Kevin Johnson. That's not good. So what the Browns need to do to compensate for that, and what they have a good chance to do to compensate for that, because the Titans don't necessarily have the strongest pass blocking offensive line in football, is be able to get pressure with their front seven. If they're able to do that, they're going to mitigate how much time Ryan Tannehill has to find Corey Davis and A.J. Brown. If you can do that, then you can mitigate the damage that they're inherently going to do, because those corners just aren't good enough for those wide receivers. So again, admittedly, on first glance, you look at this Titans offense, you watch them all year, and you put them up against the Browns defense, and you go, oh man, it's going to be a slaughter, because they have good wide receivers, they have a good quarterback, and they have a dominant run game, and the Browns have not been able to consistently stop the run. They have never stopped the pass, and they have not consistently gotten pressure every game. So you look at that on the surface, and you go, the Browns are in trouble when it comes to this offense. But if you look deeper, there's some small matchup advantages that tilt Browns that might actually let the Browns kind of have a very surprising performance here against a really good offense, because things kind of line up in the right way. But enough about the defensive matchup. Let's talk about the offense. This is an interesting matchup, right? because there are people who think the Titans defense is good. There are people who think the Titans defense is awful. I think the truth is probably somewhere in the middle, but there are definitely some convincing numbers that would say that the Titans are not a terrible defensive unit. They're the 5th ranked coverage defense in the NFL, the 4th best tackling team, and the number 9 ranked defense according to Pro Football Focus. Now, again, Pro Football Focus is subjective. It is not necessarily the gospel, but there are no gospel stats when it comes to football. So the Browns, in turn, they're the number 3 ranked run offense. They have the number 1 pass and run block offensive line and the number 6 ranked offense coming into this game. So it looks like an interesting battle. But again, in the NFL, everything's about matchups. So let's look at that. And even here, the matchups kind of favor the Browns more than I anticipated. The Titans' run defense, especially without Jadeveon Clowney, is not as good as some traditional bulk stacks would indicate. The truth is that this is a run defense that has struggled against good rushing attacks and specifically struggled a lot versus Minnesota's zone run scheme. A team that has not done well stopping outside downhill runs. Now, those are the exact type of runs that Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb love to do, so that is a massive problem for the Titans defense. Also, this Titans defense has a tendency to be over-aggressive, and if there's two things you don't want to be against a Cleveland Browns team that has Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt, is bad at stopping the outside run and also over-aggressive. We know Nick Chubb loves the cutbacks. We know how damaging he can be off of those. We know Kareem Hunt is very explosive going downfield, especially to the outside edges of the field. So it's not a good recipe to stop the Browns here. Also, any defensive line that's ever done anything against the Browns' run offense is a defensive line that can get penetration. This is not a defensive line that can get penetration consistently, or at least they have not done it all season. When it comes to the passing game, you see a very good secondary going up against Baker Mayfield. Again, people's perceptions of Baker Mayfield might not equal reality, but that's what people see when they glance at this game. Well, Baker's going to struggle against that secondary. The Titans have a better defense. It's pretty much the same team on offense, so the Titans get the edge. I get that line of thinking, but again, when you look closer, this might lean Browns more than you think, because the Titans, again, they don't get pressure a lot. They can't really get to the quarterback. They have Vic Beasley, and then also they had Jadeveon Clowney. He's on injured reserve right now, but these are two guys who are known for having a big year occasionally, but also not producing from a week-to-week standpoint, and that's kind of held true this season. And also, again, the Titans defense is very aggressive. Mike Vrabel, a very aggressive kind of coach when it comes to his defenses. And that's not going to bode well if you can't get pressure on this passing offense, because if you give Baker time, if you give the play action time, if you cannot penetrate consistently, then the Browns will eat you alive when it comes to the passing. And again, it's not like the Browns have a good offensive line. They have the best pass and run blocking offensive line in football right now by a lot of measurements, PFF included. So that's going to be a factor for Tennessee. And that's why I think the Browns have a much better chance to win this game than a lot of people are giving them, because there are a lot of vulnerabilities that the Browns, the way they're structured, the way they play, kind of expose for the Tennessee Titans. Now, what does that mean for the whole game? Well, let me talk about that. Okay, so when people talk about this game specifically, both locally and nationally, I think they talk about it in the same context of the Browns' performances versus the Steelers and the Ravens. Two games where the Browns completely got outplayed and blown out. They see the Titans as that class of a team, and when the Browns have played that class of a team, they have not shown up this year. Because, when the Browns played the Ravens, they were a Super Bowl contender. Same thing for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Obviously, they're undefeated. But my thing is, I'm not sure if the Tennessee Titans belong in that category. I think this is much more like the Raiders game and like the Colts game than anything. And when you put that game in that kind of proper context, you start to see the advantages stack up for Cleveland in a way that would catch you by surprise if you were looking at it as the Titans are this championship team, the Browns are kind of a pretender. Because yes, this is a very good Titans team. But for every strength they have, the Browns actually have a pretty decent answer. And on the other side, for the Titans, they don't really have great answers for what the Browns can do offensively when you look at this game on paper. You know, the Titans have a great rushing attack, great receivers, and a great secondary. But the Browns are uniquely equipped to stop that style of run. They've done it before. It's a one thing consistently they've done all season is stop outside zone. The receivers are good, but the Browns have a pretty good pass rush, and the Titans don't have a great pass blocking offensive line. So that could become a problem as far as getting the ball into their hands. And yes, the Titans have a strong secondary, but not a strong pass rush. So if the Browns can hold up on the offensive line, you can negate a lot of what that secondary can do by taking advantage of some of their over-aggressive tendencies on play action and, you know, hitting them because they can't really penetrate enough to affect the passing game. I honestly did not expect, when I looked deeper into this game, to feel much better about the Browns' chances. When I looked into it, I was like everybody else. I thought that this wasn't a game that favored the Browns pretty well. But the more I look into it, the more reasons I find that why the Browns can win this game. The more I find it being more realistic. So honestly, I'm at the point to where I think the Browns are going to win this game. But here's what I will say. Browns fans, if the Browns get like a 21-point lead or a 14-point lead, they go up early, do not think this game is over. The one thing that we know about the Tennessee Titans is that they don't die. They lead the league in fourth quarter comebacks. They lead the league in comeback wins. This is a cardiac kid-like team for Tennessee. They come back all the time. So they are not dead until the clock hits 0 in the fourth quarter. Like they're not done until then. This is going to be a hard-fought game. I do think the Browns can win it because I think this is going to become a game on time of possession and not turning the ball over. And I think the Browns can win those battles, given some of the advantages that they have. But that's my thoughts on this game. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. But again, guys, thank you for watching. Have a good day. Have a great night.